Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha Priti, and I'm here with a family of seekers. We are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. We just started chapter 5, so we're making our way through. We've learned a lot about karma yoga, and in chapter 5, the first kind of section of chapter 5, Krishna's going to talk about Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. So there's different paths to the same goal. That's kind of the beauty of this system and what the Gita teaches us is there's different yoga paths to reach the same goal. And Krishna explains those paths, and then he explains which path he recommends. And so right now we're learning about karma yoga and Jnana Yoga. And we're going to talk about Bhakti Yoga today, too. Somebody texted me after this and was like, so how does Bhakti Yoga fit into all of this? So we'll touch on that today. In terms of the Gita, we haven't quite got to that spot yet where we talk about Bhakti Yoga. But just because that's kind of the conclusion of the whole Gita, we'll talk about it today and how it relates to the other paths. And that's also how Prabhupada talks about it as he teaches us the Gita in his purports, the descriptions of each text. He'll bring in Bhakti Yoga throughout because that's the conclusion of the Gita. So he kind of teaches us it throughout. And so we kind of follow that same lead and kind of sprinkle in Bhakti Yoga as we're going through, even though we haven't quite got to that section yet in the Gita. So we'll kind of talk about those paths and how they all culminate in Bhakti Yoga today. So today we're going to start with text 4. I think we'll do a few verses today. Does anybody want to volunteer to read today? Mariah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, great. So Mariah will read. And before we start even, we'll just do a little review of the past few verses from last class when we started the 5th chapter. So just to kind of review what Jnana Yoga is, the path of knowledge. This is the path where we're detaching from the material world through understanding the eternal nature of the soul. So people that are following this path have really good mind control. They can sit in contemplation. They're very focused. They could study, and in that way they can discriminate between what is real, which is spirit, and what is not real, or what is temporary, which is matter. And we talked last time. I gave that cookie analogy. So Jnana Yoga is like you're taking a cookie cutter and you're cutting out the perfect cookie, and then you're getting rid of all the rest of the dough. The rest of the dough would be like the material world. You're just kind of throwing it out. You're detaching from it, and you're just keeping what's real. As opposed to karma yoga, we talked about karma yoga. This is where you're acting in the world, but with detachment. So you're doing your duties, but you're not attached to the result. You're offering your work to God, not for personal gain. So this is more of an active path. And in the cookie analogy, this would be like taking all the dough together and rolling it all up, kneading it and baking it. And so in that way, you're kind of mixing. You're engaged in the world, you're using the whole dough, you're engaged in the world, but you're offering that cookie to God. You're doing that service for God, right? It's selfless service. So those are the two paths that we've kind of talked about a lot, and we're learning about their differences and their similarities. So the Jnana path, it's more like a contemplative path. It's like knowing leads to freedom. The karma yoga path, it's more of an active path. You're more engaged in this world, but you're detached on the inside. So it's more like doing leads to freedom. But they're similar in that they both aim at liberation. So they both have the same goal, right? To get free of bondage, to connect with spirit. But one does it through thought, and the other does it through selfless action. And I feel like in my last birth, I was maybe a Jnana Yoga because I kind of gravitate more towards that side of things. Even like in my home life, I get really comfortable and I just want to kind of like retreat inside and read and study and go deep. And it's actually my teachers who continually pull me out and say, hey, no, you need to teach, you need to serve, you need to spread this wisdom. And that's why I'm here. That's what pulls me out, because my natural inclination is just to kind of retreat inside and not engage. And and I continually get pushed. And then when I get pushed and I engage, I think, oh wow, that's so nice. And then I really, kind of get situated in it. But left to my own devices, I would not put myself out here this much in this way. Honestly, just for fear of, rejection, which is what happens when we engage in this world, is that we see where our attachments are, where our insecurities are, where those little holes are, where we're not so connected to God. We're not so situated in our real eternal identity. And that helps us realize these things, right? And that gives us an opportunity also to work through them. That's what engaging in the world does. So we try to engage in this world and we try to be detached from the result. We try to just offer it as a service to God, not for our own personal gain, our own personal ego. And as we're doing that, to the degree that we're sincere, we see where we're tripping up because of our attachments, because of our egos. We see where we get paralyzed or frozen in the same way that Arjuna did. He's up getting ready to do his duty, and he's seen where he's paralyzed and why he's paralyzed, where his attachments are. And in that way, Krishna comes and instructs him in this knowledge. And really, as we've talked about, Krishna is really instructing all of us in this knowledge to help us, as we're going through this world and we're acting. This is a Gita in Action podcast, right? We're acting, we're seeing where we're tripped up and where we need spirit in our life, where we need divinity, where we need connection with God. And that's what the Gita teaches us, how to act in this world and be detached and do it as a service to God. So that's where we're going. And in these verses that we're going to talk about today, Krishna's unifying the path of karma yoga and jnana yoga. He's showing us the deeper purpose behind them. So while they're different paths, they have the same goal. And that's what he's explaining more and more. And what we're going to talk about, we're even going to layer on top of that today, as I talked about, we're going to talk about how these paths ultimately culminate in bhakti. And bhakti is loving devotional service to Krishna. And so we'll talk about jnana yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and how the paths are kind of similar, but also different. And again, this is what the Gita is teaching us today. So with that, let's get into 5.4. Let me share my screen. And Mariah, whenever you're ready.
Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, karma yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these achieves the results of both.
Thank you. So today I'm gonna repeatedly talk about the definitions of jnana yoga and karma yoga, so that when we walk away, we know those. They're at the top of our mind. So I'm gonna repeatedly explain the definitions, and I'm gonna give different analogies to also kind of show the differences and similarities of these two paths. So when we talked in chapter 3 about renunciation, about just mature renunciation, about just walking away from everything, that's what this path is. There's a couple words that Krishna uses here, Sankhya, which means just to detach, just the analytical, to analyze the material world, and in that realize that it's not real and that it's temporary, and then through that develop a detachment to it. That's when we say Sankhya, right? And then Yan means knowledge. Okay, so this is the Yan path, the path of knowledge, or you can interchangeably, you could kind of say Sankhya. It's kind of explaining the same path. So you develop knowledge in that you realize what's real and what's not real, and you detach from what's not real, realizing that the soul's real. Okay, so that's Sankhya or Yan. Again, karma yoga is acting in this material world, but with detachment and doing it for the service of God. So one path says stop acting and detach. Stop acting and detach. That's Jnana yoga. The other says keep acting, but with detachment. Both are trying to get the same place. Both are trying to get to the same place. And both, there's a level of detachment there. It's just where is that level of detachment being applied? So both are recognizing that we need to somehow detach from this material world so that we can realize spirit. But one is doing it externally and the other is doing it internally. And another analogy for to kind of demonstrate the difference between these two paths and the similarities. This is in the purport. I really like this analogy. This is about a tree. Okay, so say someone wants to nourish a tree. So they dig through and they find the roots of the tree and they figure out that they have to water those roots so that the tree grows. So this person dug through and they found the roots themselves and they figured out that they have to water that. Another person hears that if you water the tree from the bottom, they hear this from like a trusted source, a trusted authority, that if they water the tree from the bottom, that it'll grow. So both people water the tree and both trees grow. But the person who just heard from the authority that you have to water the tree, that way is easier. So that way is like the karma yoga way. And the person who dug through to find the root itself, that's more like the yan yoga way. The body is like the tree, and the soul is like the root. So the yan yoga yogi like dug through the body to find the soul, the root, and then figured out, okay, now I need to serve this root so that I can nourish the whole. But the karma yogi, he's just told that you need to nourish the soul. He's just kind of told how to nourish the soul. And so he does it. And in that way, both have success in that the tree grows and the tree's nourished. But they just are doing it different ways. So in this example, the tree is like the body, and the soul is like the root. And after one comes to know that they're not the body and that they're the soul, through the process of yan, so through this process of just analyzing what's real and what's not real, they come to the conclusion that they're actually the soul and they're not the body. Then they realize that they have to water the root. In the same way that when a yan yogi realizes that they're not the body and they're the soul, they have to act at the level of the soul. And so they have to perform devotional service. Right? They have to act at that level of the soul. And this is what happens. Detachment from the body leads to action for the soul. So they realize what's not real, which is this material existence, which is this body, this mind package. Real meaning it's not real, meaning that it's temporary. And they realize what's real, meaning that it's eternal, it's the soul. And therefore they realize that they need to nourish the soul. And we nourish the soul by devotional service, right? By service to God. And so that's kind of the analogy here with the trees to demonstrate the difference between yan yoga and karma yoga. But in karma yoga, if one starts off by acting at the level of the soul right now, just by acting with detachment, then they can make spiritual advancement. So if they're just told from the authority, look, this is just kind of like we are in the Gita, this is your mind body package. It's not real. What's real is your soul. This is how you act at the level of the soul. If we just do that, you can make spiritual advancement, and you don't have to go through all the rigor of digging to the bottom to realize what's real and what's not real, right? Because we're taught, and then we're taught how to act. And in that way, we can gradually become detached from matter, and we can make spiritual advancement. So I thought that was a pretty nice analogy. Here's another one. This is another analogy to kind of demonstrate that the end result is the same. Okay, so if I'm holding a rock in my hand and I want to pick up an axe, I drop the rock to free my hand. Then I can pick up the axe. Okay, that's like yan. So someone with material desires must first drop his material attachment before acquiring this spiritual taste. Okay, so the rock is the material desires. They have to drop it so that they can pick up the axe, which represents this spiritual taste. So they drop the rock, they can pick up the axe. That's how Yani's yoga do it. First, they detach from matter, and then they can attach to spirit after they realize, again, what's real and what's not real. So a karma yogi, it's more like they're doing both those steps at once. They have a rock in their hand. They realize that they actually want an axe. So they pick up the axe, and because they, are just using one hand, the rock automatically falls out. And this is more like karma yoga. When we act with detachment, it allows us to become materially detached and spiritually attached at the same time. So it happens congruently. Because we're trying to act with detachment, to the material world and we're attaching to spirit, then our attachments to material world just kind of drop off. And those of us that have been on this call for a while and have been trying to practice these things, we realize that, right? The more that we're engaging in spiritual endeavors, going to a kirtan, association, these calls, chanting God's names, right? The more that we're doing that, the more that the things that we used to do to give us pleasure are just kind of stale. Things that are maybe more in line with our lower nature, like maybe partying, or maybe it's not even in line with our lower nature, but it's just like, that's like, maybe it's just watching a television show. You're like, I'd rather come to a call like this than numb out to a television show. And that's what's happening. The more that we add the spirit to our life, the less that some of these other things that we went to feel connection and pleasure just don't really add up. So that's what's happening here. And in this verse, Krishna's saying that karma yoga and jnana yoga, they're not actually in conflict. They're both legitimate paths. And if you do either of them properly, then you'll reach that same destination. And that's the great news about this. We don't have to be renunciants. We don't have to run out to the forest, which is really difficult. We don't have to shut our doors to the world outside. We don't have to become that super renounced monk to make spiritual progress. We can get to the same destination by doing our duty responsibly and detaching from the outcome, doing it as a service to God. We can get to that same destination. And what is that destination? It's not just freedom from suffering. It is freedom from suffering, but that's not it. It's not even just understanding the soul, which will also happen. But the Gita doesn't just stop at knowledge or detachment. I mean, those are byproducts, and those are great, and we experience that, and it's liberating. But as we keep going in the Gita, it will show us more and more. It will reveal what that final destination is. And that's the highest goal. That's this bhakti. That's that devotion to him. That's the final destination. And these other byproducts that we're seeing are just kind of stops along the way. We're getting free from bondage. We're getting free from suffering. We're getting more peaceful. We're getting more self-controlled. We're understanding the soul. Those are wonderful. And those are like stops along the way. But the ultimate destination is this devotion, this love and devotion to God. And that's the final goal. And that's bhakti. And that's where all these paths culminate. And in fact, just like that destination, as we're going to this final destination, we have all these little stops along the way that we go through, that we experience benefit, right? And they help build our faith, and we continue along the way. In that way, our final destination is bhakti, but it includes all these other paths. Karma yoga, we take a pit stop at karma yoga along the way, because we're acting in this world, but we're doing it for God. And it also includes jnana yoga, because we understand through this service, through this selfless service, we understand who we are and who he is. So they're not actually conflicting paths. They're more like steps, and bhakti is the culmination. But the beautiful thing about bhakti is that we don't even have to practice the other paths necessarily. We could just go straight to bhakti. And just like I said, it includes all the other paths. We're gaining that knowledge through bhakti, through the purification. We're working in selfless service. Right? So this is the beauty of bhakti. But these other paths are also valid paths. And they'll take us to the same destination, and we can gain realization from them. So this is a kind of a reflection question for us to think about is, do I lean more towards understanding and withdrawing, or towards active engagement? And as I kind of talked about it at the beginning of class, I think I lean more towards understanding and withdrawing. It's almost like a safer place for me to just kind of withdraw and contemplate and meditate to myself, and to really put myself out there and get out in the world and serve and teach. And I need teachers to push me. Or left to my own devices, I'll just be in my content little householder life with my family and studying. But I do what I realize when I'm pushed out there is how much more connected I feel. It's like another level of connection when we're serving God. The connection that you feel with him, the way that you see him show up in your life. My experience has been that it grows. It's you really see it happen. It expands. It's kind of incredible. And you're also confronted with your own stuff at that time. You're confronted with your own insecurities. You're confronted with your own attachments. Somebody says something about the way that you're serving, and it really hurts your feelings. You realize that it shakes your faith a little bit. Maybe this person was somebody that you really looked up to, and you kind of have to go through that, and in that way we get pruned. We're getting pruned so that we can show up as servants of God, as pure servants of God. Our consciousness can get purified, and we can show up in that way. So, and not showing up for our own attachments or our own ego or whatever our own material desires are. As we're going through this service, we get pruned of that so that we can show up
We can't
more
really
and
hear you,
more
Allison.
purely with a pure intent. So that's what the process is here. And it's a good thing for us all to think about. And sometimes, a teacher told me one time, I forget who it was, but it was like, if you're ever asked to serve, like if you're ever asked to do a kirtan, if you're ever asked to give a class, or do it. If in your mind you're like, I don't really want to do that, I don't want to put myself out there, I'm scared, do it. Push yourself out there to, and sometimes a teacher told me this one time too. I like kirtan. I'm okay at kirtan, but I'm not the one. I don't want to be in the middle and like do a kirtan in front of everybody. That makes me incredibly nervous. And a teacher told me sometimes humility for a person is putting themselves out there and doing the kirtan. Sometimes humility for a person is not putting themselves out there and doing a kirtan. And so it's all just different levels of realization of where your ego is and how we can kind of push up against it so that we can become purified. And that's what we're doing here. Does anybody want to share on that note any of their experience of if they lean more towards understanding and withdrawing, or if actively engaging is more their default mode? Does anybody want to share any personal realization there?
I'll just share a little. I would definitely say I leaned towards, yeah, like withdrawing. And my experience has been the same as yours. Like once I started actively putting myself out there and like going and looking for association and things to do in service, you feel so much more connected, and you've experienced Krishna in a whole nother way of like giving you tasks to do in a way. Like you said, you don't really like going out and doing kirtan, but if someone asks you to do it, your humility is to do it. And I feel that same exact way. It's like, yeah, I don't always like engaging because of fear of whatever, but once you start doing it, that connection to Krishna is just like amazing. Like you're like, wow, I actually did it, and Krishna was so present with me, and yeah, so it's definitely a whole nother experience than just studying on your own and understanding with your mind. It gives you that understanding on a whole different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why this is a good segue to introduce what Mariah's going to do here. We're going to launch Gita groups, and Mariah's going to lead our first one here. And this is going to be, it's going to be a little bit smaller, more intimate setting for people to just kind of check in and share. Maybe there'll be a different theme for each time. Each time you meet, different theme from like a principle of the Gita. And just to share kind of where you are in your life with that principle and living it, and how it's shown up for you or how it's not, and just to kind of help ourselves stay accountable and recommit to living some of these principles. It's not recorded or anything. It's just going to be kind of a check-in meeting, and for everybody to share and check in with each other and walk each other home, essentially, in a more kind of intimate setting. So if you're interested in doing that, I kind of threw this service on Mariah, and she's perfect for it because she shows up to every single one of these Gita, and she's so enthusiastic. And also she came with a quite a depth of knowledge, as being raised in this philosophy. So she really holds a lot of wisdom and knowledge there. So if anybody's interested in being in one of those groups, please just reach out. You can text me or email seekersquest108@gmail.com, and we can get you set up so that you can have some support in this journey, in this walk. Okay, that was a great segue. Thank you, Mariah.
Thank
And does anybody else want to share a personal anecdote of withdrawing or acting and how that's affected them? What they lean more towards? Trevor, okay, there you are. You're trying to unmute, right? Because you're not yet unmute. Okay, there you go.
Sorry, I'm all discombobulated today. Yeah, I think, like you said, it's about the individual usually, but for me, it was like it seems like there's a time for both. You know, there's a time to renounce and there's a time to radically act, and the dance of life is about finding that rhythm with Krishna because renunciation is very important, and it's can be complicated and it could be easy. Like, got to kind of weed your garden out in the beginning because otherwise you're going to be completely distracted from the soul's purpose. But a full blown renouncement, like from this material world, does not necessarily mean to just go in the forest. It's actually forbidden in this age. It's actually more important to show people how to engage in your daily activities without being addicted to material activities, stuff like that. So, when we make that our primary focus, it doesn't work. We have to realize that these sort of things come as a byproduct of your yoga practice. And like you said, Bhakti yoga is all inclusive. It has all the other yogas inside of its package. So the more we just lean into the process and fall in love with it, all the other goals that we're setting out for that are micro goals, they'll come without effort, you know. And engagement, association, very highly recommended. So I had a problem for a while, like finding proper association. I went through like an intense pruning process. So I had to learn the hard way how to find the right people, because I would look up to someone and be betrayed pretty badly. That's just something everyone has to go through on this path. And then finding the kirtan center, finding stuff like this going on. It took a while, but whenever it finally manifested, it's very easy to see how effective and necessary and essential it is, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, my thing is there's a dance to life. There's a rhythm to your individual and our collective journey. And it's about finding that rhythm, you know, through your relationship with Krishna or God, however you want to describe them.
Yeah, I really like that point that there's a time for both of them. And sometimes it's like the one that you don't want is the one that you should be doing at that time, right? I
Yeah.
really like that point. That's beautiful. And I also like your point about it's people that you looked up to betraying you. Not that I liked that point, but I can relate to that point. And for me, I don't know about you, but that kind of shook my faith a little bit. But what it does more than anything, which is such a blessing, is kind of pushes you out of the nest to learn how to fly on your own. You know, it
Yeah.
says, okay, you need to take a little bit more shelter in this yourself, you know, without relying on needing others I mean, it's important, we all do, but it does really push you to kind of own it yourself. Was that your experience?
Yes, absolutely. Because uh, there there were people that I needed to renounce from, apparently, that I wasn't ready to. So Krishna gave me that push by organizing creatively certain experiences and circumstances that weren't so pleasant.
Yeah,
So,
right.
and without that, I wouldn't be living where I'm at right now, you know. So that's also a form of renunciation. I got completely out of the suburbs, but at the same time, I'm like distant from association, which isn't really new to me. Now I'm on top of a mountain with no one around me, but now I'm associating with people, so with proper people.
Yeah.
I'm attracting
Well,
the right people. So it's like I had to get away to attract and the people that I'm attracting mostly are people from where I was just from.
yeah.
So it's pretty trippy how things are happening and whatnot. But uh yeah, it's all happening as a byproduct of devotional service. It's like when you just fall in love with that process, it can be intense sometimes. But whenever you're able to really start enjoying it and start doing it regardless, everything that needs to happen for you just happens effortlessly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And that's beautiful. And even if you're not in love with the process, even just to commit to it, you will see this transformation. So thank you so much for sharing, Trevor.
thank you.
I do want to talk a little bit before we move on to the next verse about the difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga, because that might be a little bit confusing because we've talked a lot about how karma yoga is working in this world with detachment. And we talked a lot about how bhakti yoga can kind of be the same thing. We work in this world as a service, as in giving as an offering to God. So just to explain a little bit the difference here is the difference is a lot in the conception of the absolute truth. So the karma yogi may not know that there's an absolute truth. They might not know that there's a God, a personal form of God, right? But they know that I'm not the body, I'm the soul. And so therefore they want to act in a way that's congruent with that soul. Right? They want to act in a mood of sacrifice as to not serve the body because they've realized that they're not the body and become detached from the body. So in that way, attachment to spirit is karma yoga. And just the conception of what that spirit is not clearly defined, it may not be clearly defined. They're more acting as an offering, as a way to be harmonious with the world, with the universe. That's more kind of their mood. They may not have a fully formed conception of what the absolute truth is yet. And the bhakti yogi understands that I'm a part of God. God is the absolute truth. So I need to work not just in a mood of sacrifice, but in a mood of divine sacrifice, in a mood of sacrifice just for the pleasure of God. And when I act in this way, I'll become liberated. So attachment to God is bhakti yoga. Attachment to spirit is karma yoga. And that spirit may not be clearly yet defined. And we'll even get into that more in the Gita, the different conceptions and realizations of the absolute truth, because there's also different levels of realizations of the absolute truth. But the highest realization is this personal form of God, and that is bhakti yoga. And bhakti yoga is the highest because bhakti isn't about just getting free, it's about getting close. It's about relationship. So karma yoga is beautiful. It teaches us how to act without attachment to the result. And in that way, it purifies the heart. That heart is getting purified through selfless action. Jnana yoga is deep. It gives us this knowledge to see the difference between the soul and the body. So it's a path of discernment and detachment. But bhakti yoga, it's different. It's not just about freedom, it's about love. It's not about walking away from the world or mastering the mind. It's about offering everything, your actions, your knowledge, your whole heart to Krishna. And that's like the highest. And that's like the culmination of all the paths. And some of these other paths help us get there. You know, it's great to do selfless service. It's great to contemplate on what is real and what's not real and to kind of realize that. But in bhakti, when we offer everything that you have with a heart full of love, that's the ultimate. Because it's not just about getting free from this material existence, getting free from suffering. It's about love for something higher. And we all know from our experience in this material world, what is higher than love? We all love. We have families we love. We have kids we love. That's pretty high. Right? That's pretty high. But love for the ultimate, love for the supreme, love for God, that's the highest. Not just in this world, but in all the worlds and in everything. That's the highest. And that's the practice of bhakti. That's what we're doing here. You know? And a devotee, someone who's practicing this, they're always liberated because they act only for the pleasure of God. There's no duality in the mind because whatever they do for God. And in that way, they stay free from duality, from what's good. They don't have to ask themselves, is this good? Is this bad? Is this going to make me happy? Is this going to make me sad? They don't think in terms of that because they're so focused on just serving God. And this is like the perfection of this person, you know. And the process is that we practice this and we may experience these dualities, this good and bad, and that prunes us, you know, that kind of purifies us. We see where we're still kind of locked in this material conception. And in that way, we move forward. And that's the process. We do our best to serve God purely and sincerely. And we see, we get pruned along the way. We get purified along the way. But this is the mindset, you know, that's what they're locked on. That's all they care about is serving God. Whatever comes in life, I see how it can be used to serve God. And we learn that service to God can be formed in all situations. The form of service may change, but the idea that I'm the servant of God can be sustained in all situations. You know, even, you know, I spend a lot of my time just playing with my 5-month-old, almost 5-month-old. And sometimes it's like it's kind of like just the same thing over and over. Sometimes it's a little bit mind-numbing. If anybody has like a little baby, it could be a little bit mind-numbing. But in those situations, you know, even just to think, even sometimes I just look at her and I think, this is God's child. You know, this is God's child. And my job is to give her as much love as I can so that she can experience God's love. You know, that's how she experiences God's love is through her mother, through her parents. And that's my job. So even when I don't want to, even when she's driving me nuts, it's my service to God right now is to be that instrument to show this child love. And even just kind of trying to cultivate that mindset, you know, whatever you're doing, how can you do it as a service to God? And you'll find that whatever situation you're in life, whether you're at work, whether you're in the car, you know, whether you're in an argument, how can you be an instrument for God in that time, in that circumstance? And it doesn't even so much matter what it is. It's just cultivating that consciousness around it. And that's what we're trying to do. And this is how we could stay liberated in all circumstances. And I also realize for myself that if I'm really in a funk and I've been, you know, been doing this mind-numbing game with my daughter for 10 hours and I'm just burnt out, if I could change my consciousness to that position, to recognizing that I'm a servant of God and acting in that way, it also just kind of lifts me up. You know, it's kind of like a shot of is it dopamine that just like makes you feel happy because it makes you feel connected. You know? And so it's even better in this material circumstance. You know, it even makes us happier and just better people, this kind of consciousness. And so this is what we're trying to do. And this is how we stay liberated. So the karma yogi purifies the heart through action. The jnana yogi clears the mind through knowledge. The bhakti yogi transforms both the heart and the mind through love. That's what we are trying to develop, your love for God. And this is both the process, and the goal. Bhakti yoga. It's both the process, both the path and the goal. To develop this love for God. So Krishna is going to clarify this point further. And we will move to 5.5 now. When you're ready, Mariah, if you want to read 5.5 for us.
Just loading. All right. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are.
Thank you. So here again, Krishna's talking about this Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, and how they ultimately get us to the same path. They ultimately get us to the same goal. So Jnana Yoga is renouncing the world, realizing what's real, what's not real, and detaching from what's not real, which is this material existence, because it's temporary. They're realizing that they're part and parcel of the material world. They're not of the material world, but of the supreme spirit of the whole. And so therefore they detach from the material world. And in devotional service, one is attached to the work of God consciousness. So again, one process appears to involve detachment, and the other involves attachment. But, and this is the synthesis, and this is pretty cool, detachment from matter and attachment to God is the same. I'll say that again. Detachment from matter and attachment to God is the same. And that's what this verse is saying. One who sees this sees things as they are. One who understands this sees things as they are. It's because the real purpose of study is to find the ultimate goal of life. And the ultimate goal of life is self-realization. So there's no difference between the conclusions reached by the two processes, reached by detachment from matter and attachment to God. It's the same. And wise people see this as the same. And if one practices one of them, then they'll get the fruits of both. And therefore they're not different because their goal is the same. And this is what this verse is saying. Paths may be different, but the goal is the same. The goal of both of these paths is to free us from bondage. Both of these paths will free us from bondage when they're done with detachment. So whether one has authentic detachment and renounces the world, or one has internal detachment and lives and acts in the world, in both cases, if one has detachment, one will be able to live free from bondage. And that's what this verse is saying. And there is something to be addressed, in the yoga ladder. There's different, the paths are kind of on a ladder, meaning that the path of Jnana is technically, in one sense, higher than karma. So it goes karma yoga, Jnana yoga, bhakti yoga. Bhakti is the highest. But so in one sense, they may not, Jnana may be higher because it takes a higher level of self-control. It takes, these people are completely renounced from the world. This is a pretty high place to be. But because they both lead to the same goal, they're actually similar. And in the third chapter, if we remember, I think Trevor kind of alluded to this when he was talking earlier too. Krishna tells Arjuna to practice karma yoga because that's what he's qualified for. That's where his consciousness is. Remember, he's a Kshatriya, so he has a lot of passion. He's very passionate. He's not his nature is not that he's like, contemplative, and no, he's an action person. So he's saying practice karma yoga. This is what you're suited for. But he's saying even if you are qualified for Jnana yoga, even if you do have that level of consciousness, that high level of material consciousness where you can go sit out in the woods and meditate for hours and just renounce from everything. You don't need to act in the world. Even if you can do that, even if you're qualified for that, still practice karma yoga to set a good example. This is because this is so important, because most people aren't qualified for that level of renunciation. And if people start seeing high leaders off doing that, they're going to think, oh, I'm qualified for that. I'm going to do that too. And then before you know it, you have all these people prematurely renouncing, which we've talked about how dangerous that can be for both yourself and for others. So this is Krishna's instruction to Arjuna and to us. Act in the world. Even if you're qualified for this high level of renunciation, act. So here Krishna is taking the discussion to a deeper level. He's saying that actually Jnana is not higher It may, in one sense, it may be because it takes a higher degree of self-control and stillness. Right? So in one sense, it may be, but it's not like yan will lead to a higher destination. It may be considered a more advanced stage, but it's not going to lead to a better destination. So therefore, it's not higher. This is the beauty of the Gita. It doesn't rank paths by like ego or superiority, right? But it ranks them by what's suitable for the person. So Krishna is not saying pick the hardest path to prove yourself. That's what many of us like to do. That's what I like to do. Right? Pick the hardest path to prove yourself. No, he's saying pick the path that suits your nature and do it well. That's what he's saying. Pick the path that suits your nature and do it well. And if it's done with bhakti, all paths become one. They lead to the same goal. And one who sees that they both lead to the same goal is a true seer. So that's what Krishna is saying here. And I love this point that Krishna is not saying pick the hardest thing so that you can be the best. He's saying pick what suits your nature. And for most of us, this path of action is what suits our nature. Most of us have so much passion in the body that we're just not suited for that level of meditation and contemplation. And what Trevor said, it's not recommended for the sage because of that. We're just not suited for it. So one who sees the similarity is a true seer. And this is what Krishna's talking about. He's talking about seeing with knowledge. Seeing with knowledge. And this is like if someone gets a chest x-ray and the patient looks at it, they're not going to really understand what they're looking at, right? But the doctor can come and see the chest x-ray, and they can diagnose the patient. And this is because the doctor has knowledge. So he can look at this x-ray and he can tell you exactly what's what. But a person who doesn't have that knowledge can't. And this is why it's so important that we have knowledge and we see with knowledge, because without knowledge, we can't see properly, even if it's right in front of us, even if it's just staring at us right in the face. If we don't have this knowledge, we can't really understand it. So, but when we see things properly, then we can actually see. Then we can actually understand. Otherwise, we don't see, even when we see. Okay, so it's like we need this knowledge, and we need to see things as they are. And this is so important as we're acting in this world. Because if we don't have this knowledge and we're acting in this world, we're not getting purified. Even if we can develop some level of detachment, if we don't have the proper knowledge, we don't really understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, we're not going to progress. We're not going to get purified. So that's why this knowledge is so important. So externally, it may appear that a person who is renounced from the world is much more advanced than a person who's doing karma yoga and who is engaged in the world. But we should understand that both are working towards the same destination. So we need to see the commonality of the destination beyond the differences of the process. And if we can understand this, then we actually become real seers. Okay, should we do one more verse? Should we finish off this section of the difference between Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga? And then we can start a new section the next time? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do one more verse. It's a short one. And this will finish off this section of the first section of the 5th chapter. Okay. When you're ready, Mariah.
We're on 6, right?
Yep.
Merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. But a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay.
So this verse is just saying that if one is detached from matter, but they're not attaching themselves to anything higher, then it's dangerous, right? That they can be in kind of a vulnerable situation. It can be easy to fall from that position, because renunciation without devotion, it's kind of dry. It's not very fulfilling. And it's difficult in this world for us to be without pleasure. We need joy, connection, love. We need these things. This is parts of our makeup. We need these things. And only bhakti offers these things. So it's really difficult to detach without attaching to something higher. It's like trying to give up junk food without having any other good food, healthy food to eat. It's difficult to sustain. We need some real nourishment. We can't give up the junky stuff if we don't have real nourishment, or we're likely just to go back to the junky stuff if that's what's available, because we need real nourishment. And that's why this path can be a dangerous path. If one's not connected with the absolute truth and experiencing something higher, they can easily fall back down. So that's this yan yoga. When we talk about yan yoga, it can refer to people, to what we call them impersonalists, people that believe God is ultimately formless. It's people that are like, oh, we just all merge into the same. We all merge into oneness. That's kind of an impersonalist conception of God. That God is everywhere and God is everything, and that is, God is everywhere and God is everything, but he's not limited to that. And that's what both Bhakti Yoga, we believe that God has a personal form. That's Bhakti Yoga. So yan yogis who only believe that God is formless, the highest conception of God is that he's formless, and liberation means that we all merge into oneness. That's what this yan yoga realization leads to, and it's a lower conception of God. The highest conception of God is this personal conception of God, and that's bhakti, saying that the soul, that freedom, that is meant for love, and love is between two people. Love is love. We need a beloved to love, and so that's God, loving God. If that's a little bit confusing to you, these conceptions of God, don't worry, we're going to get into it a lot more as the Gita goes on, but just to kind of insert that point a little bit. So this is something important for us to ask ourselves. Am I trying to escape the world or connect more deeply with God through it? And that's what Krishna is encouraging us to do. Connect, use the world, use this just like the cookie dough, use the dough, use everything, bake it up, roll it up, use that as an offering to God. Whatever we're doing in this world, use it as an offering to God. And in that way, we connect with God. We don't have to discard, everything that is material, our roles, responsibilities, whatever we're doing. We don't have to discard it. We don't have to detach from it. Do it, but do it as an offering to God. And I'll give you one last example here as before we close. Even sometimes when we're doing spiritual things, if we're not doing them with love, we're not really doing it. And I'll give you one example. Chanting. I love chanting. I love chanting God's names. And before I had a kid, it was very easy for me. I would sit down for hours and chant. It was no problem. Sometimes now I realize like it's a lot harder for me because I'm always taking care of her. And sometimes I'll be chanting just to do it, just to get, my rounds in. I'll be chanting and I'll be taking care of her, and I won't really be focused on her. And she'll feel it. She'll be kind of like fussy or and meanwhile, I'm chanting, but I'm not really doing that either. I'm kind of like half there, just kind of trying to get them done so that I can say that I did it, and sometimes I come to the realization like, okay, I'm just going to put these away and just focus on my duty here by taking care of my daughter with full love and presence, and do that as an offering to God. And sometimes for me, that's the higher move. That's the higher move, to try to generate that consciousness, cultivate that consciousness around what I'm doing so that I can do that fully and presently. And maybe it's not in that moment chanting God's names, which I can't even fully show up for whatever reason. And when I do that, I tell myself, okay, and I pray that God arranges, my day so that I do have some time where I can fully focus on that. And the crazy thing is, every time that happens to me, God does such a range. Maybe my daughter takes a nap or, something so that I have that time that I can actually go and commit fully to that. But this is what the kind of consciousness we need to try to cultivate, and we do it intentionally. It's not always just like, okay, I did this spiritual thing, check it off the box, check it off the box, check it off, it's like, how are we showing up? Where's our consciousness? Where's our intention? Where's our heart? And that's what really makes us spiritual. That's what really helps us to progress and develop this love of God. So that's what we're learning here. And we'll start the next section at the next class, the next section, text 7 through 16. We'll start a new section. We'll learn about that on Thursday. So we have a few minutes left here. Does anybody want to share that hasn't shared yet today? Anybody want to share that hasn't shared it? Okay. So let's hear from anybody else that wants to share before we end today. Trevor.
I think it's brilliant about you mentioning the devotional service is the path and the goal. Is it once you realize that, then you start building some serious momentum. And jnani yoga, it's a necessary stepping stone, and I'll share my experiences with that like a little bit. And it's easy to get stuck on that stepping stone, but when you're approaching God, that's kind of naturally what we do. We're trying to just figure out what's going on, and you're approaching them with your head and trying to gain knowledge. And once you get to a certain point, it's like, okay, what's next? Because it has limits. Devotional service does not have limits, and Krishna or God is not separate from devotional service. It's one thing to know everything there is about someone you're attracted to, but don't you want to engage in activities with them? So
Right.
it just makes sense. Naturally, we're going to want to get involved with the all attractive being.
Yeah.
So that's where Krishna is engaging fully, very playful and loving life inside of devotional service. So eventually you'll get to that point, and when you reach a certain level of jnani, Gita books will just pop up in your vicinity, and Krishna will try to meet you more than halfway, because he's trying to show us we're doing things a little backwards. Try approaching me heart first, because you can't really actually fully understand God without love and loving service. Through loving service, the understanding happens as a byproduct.
Yeah. That's
And
a beautiful point.
yeah, so true jnani and its full maturity and development happens actually through bhakti.
Very nice. I like that point that, even if, we're in a relationship with a person, we do feel a certain amount of appreciation and respect just from studying them, just from learning about them, hearing about them. But to actually engage with them is like a whole nother level of connection that we feel. That's really nice. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.
Katie, do you like to share with us?
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I missed the beginning of class, so I hope this flows well. But but I was thinking about how I've heard before that bhakti encompasses these other paths in a way. Like, for example, a karma. With bhakti, we're considering our actions and trying to act with selflessly and without creating more karma and without thinking, what's the reaction? What do I want out of this? That's part of bhakti. And jnana is part of bhakti because we're supporting our devotion with learning and scriptures and study together and using our minds and our intellect to understand our devotion more, and deepen it. And I've heard how a good thing about bhakti is that, well, you get all the paths because they're kind of part of it. And I've heard how those paths don't always encompass as much like devotion or as many different paths within them. And I was kind of thinking about how it seems like they do, but at the end, sort of, like you might get really into either one and then become more realized and more your faith would grow, right? Because through those other paths of karma or jnana or And you would get to devotion and bhakti, like you're saying, different paths lead up the same mountain,
Mhm.
But I just think it was so nice to learn that a while back, that like, well, why not do the bhakti one that is the one that most has the goal and the paths are the same, like we've been saying.
Mhm.
And for me, like with more asana yoga based stuff for many years, and like kirtan, once a year, I'd be like, where is this? What is this thing? And finally when I met devotees like for real and got into it, I was like, this is the one. I've always had this faith I didn't really understand, and was like, well,
Mhm.
wait, hatha yoga, okay, I've done this forever. What,
Mhm.
and that was like the real missing piece, was to understand that faith I already kind of had, but to find a path that really focused there.
Right.
So that was a little jumbled, but I think that's what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Beautiful. Mariah, do you want to finish us off here?
I don't have too much today. Everyone's share was so beautiful, and yeah, I love how everyone's seeing how bhakti yoga, it encompasses it all, and hearing how it's the goal and the process. Like that's such a cool concept. I remember the first time I really heard that, I started going and staying at the temple regularly, and I was staying with one of the girls in the ashram, and she was like, that's the thing about bhakti. It's the goal and the process. And I was like, what? Like that like blew my mind. Like I was like, yeah, like that's it. That's all we have to do is just engage in this process, engage in these acts of devotional service, and that's it. That's what we do when we go back to the spiritual world, is we're engaged in loving God, and that's what brings the spiritual world here into the material right now. And it's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really is. Really is. Beautiful shares today. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and being part of this Sangha and association. As we know, it's invaluable in our paths and our progress in spiritual life. So thank you all for doing it, being here.
Thank you.
And I will see you all on Thursday.
Haribol.
Thank you. Cool.